Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, face up, or slip on your shoes and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps.
Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 139 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So you might hear some background noise during this episode. I apologize ahead of time. Right now, the plumber and the carpenter are super busy doing all sorts of loud things in my as yet not finished kitchen. So if you hear some rumblings in the background, that's what that is. You'll be hearing this on April 30th. April 30th, in my recent child loss reality, has become a very significant day for a number of reasons. The first reason it's significant is my Uncle Nathan's son, Caleb, was born on April 30th, 2003. April of 2003 was a significant month in my family. Molly started it off being born on April 1st. Ian joined in being born April 9th, and Caleb finished it off being born April 30th. And we thought how amazing it was that there were three cousins all born in April. Caleb was the first one to go. He went off to heaven in 2011. He was 8 years old. He died of a brain tumor, a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, a DIPG or a DIPG. So April 30th became a very significant date in the lives of Gracie and Molly. Death is always a tricky thing to explain. And as I've shared before, Gracie looked at it as a very sort of fluffy, oh, everyone's in heaven floating on clouds. And Molly had 9,000 questions. Why do young people die? Why do old people die? What happens when you die? Do you know all the answers? Is the truth revealed? Is there nothing? So anything that we participated in, we used to Relay for Life with the American Cancer Society. And we would always make posters and luminary bags and things for Caleb because we wanted him to know that we remembered him. We'd shout his name to the sky. And I remember flying to his funeral, which was in August of 2011, just being overwhelmed with sadness because it just seemed off and wrong that a little boy would die. And I didn't know how Julie would cope with this. Julie is his mother. Not knowing that 5 years later, I would go through the very same thing. I would lose my April-born baby to a brain tumor, a different kind. Molly had an astrocytoma. Caleb's brain tumor would have killed him regardless. And he actually lived a lot longer than most DIPG victims do. Most of them are dead within a year. Caleb was diagnosed at 4 and lived till age 8. He was incredibly lucky in that regard. He had a lot of healthy living with that tumor in his head. Molly's astrocytoma, had they just looked at it and taken it out, wouldn't have impacted her life at all. So there's difference there, but you can see that April is a significant month for me. I've mentioned before as well that I have this terrific podcast editor who finds amazing podcasts for me. And he found one for me that I'm hoping one day to be a guest on called Last Day. And actually this podcast was shared with me by a couple of other people, friends of mine, who, understand with having a child or two in heaven, that these kinds of things would be interesting to me. And that podcast goes into great detail about people's last days. You learn all about the person and what their issue was, whatever it was that brought them to die. And you hear from family members all about their last day. So initially, I wanted Gracie and Kenny to sit with me here and do this podcast episode with me. And they were both initially like, yeah, that sounds great. And then as the day grew closer and we kept trying to rearrange a time, it really was clear that the three of us aren't ready to sit in the same room and talk about Molly's last day. And that's the ugly side of my child loss story. I missed it. Molly's last day of awake, meaningful life, April 30th, 2016, I was on a plane. I was in Amsterdam and getting on a plane and coming home. And then I didn't have a ride from the airport. And Roy and I had a fight and he refused to bring me home. So I had to spend the night in Massachusetts. So one of the hardest things for me to get over in her death was that I was an hour away from her when she was in this bathroom vomiting and throwing up the last night she would spend in this house ever. And I was an hour away. I wasn't a continent away at this time. And that has eaten at me for a long time. There's a lot of anger around that from Gracie and Kenny, and rightfully so. Where was I? I wasn't with my daughter, either of my daughters. So when I've listened to Gracie and Kenny talk about Molly's last day, she had a wonderful day. And the way that I've been able to reconcile my own heartache at missing it is that it would have been completely different if I were here. Kenny and I were not okay. And what made the last 7 days of Molly's life, 8 days of Molly's life, good for Kenny, is that I wasn't here. Molly was very, very tuned into what was going on with me and Roy, what was going on with me and Kenny, how that factored into the big picture of our life. Gracie was just a mess. She couldn't make heads or tails of it and didn't know what to think. She just wanted me home. Kenny was obviously quite distraught as well. It's hard for us to talk about it, but what makes me okay with missing all of those days is that they wouldn't have been the way they were if I were here. If I were here, Kenny would have stayed at our apartment. He wouldn't have spent probably any time with Molly that week. I spend all the time with Molly. As much as I berate myself for missing out, for choosing all the time I spent at my job and hanging out with Doug, and then Roy, when I think of how many choices I made that took me away from Molly, I was still around Gracie and Molly a lot more than Kenny, always in day-to-day life, throughout their life. And so I look at her last week, and every day Kenny shared that she would wake up and say, "What do you want to do today, Daddy?" Or Kenny would say, "What do you girls want to do today?" And Molly would reply, "What do you want to do, Daddy?" And it really was about him. So April 30th, it's best I can summarize from listening to Gracie and Kenny talk about it, was a beautiful sunny day. Our disaster of a picket fence, which if you see me, you see I'm looking out the window. You can't see the window, but I'm looking at the remnants of that fence, was a disaster then and really needed to be fixed. And Kenny and Molly spent the morning fixing it, shimming it, putting these green stakes into the ground to hold the fence up, to repaint it and to make it, just hold on for a bit longer until we decided what we were going to do and how we were going to replace it. They spent the whole morning doing that. They walked to Orange Leaf and had ice cream, a frozen yogurt with fruit. They got a wiffle ball. Kenny's son, Davey, was big into wiffle up and wiffle ball. And so Kenny got a wiffle ball and a bat, and they played wiffle ball. And Molly was able to run around, go up and down. She was fine. She had not one physical symptom all day. The day ended for them with frantic texts from me, of course, saying, I'm late, I'm not going to get home, I don't have a ride. And them being really upset, like, please come home, please come home. But they went to bed, and Kenny said that he went in to check on them, and it was like 11 at night, and they were together in Gracie's bed watching Friends on Molly's iPad. Molly was obsessed with Friends. And then they fell asleep, and that was it. She woke up 3 hours later vomiting, and the rest I don't want to talk about. That's not her last day. Even though she was alive in the ER on May 1st, Molly's last day of meaningful life was April 30th, and she went to bed happy. It was that night or the night before that she changed her Instagram bio. It was, it used to be like Moll's Balls and, your typical Molly B Instagram bio. And she changed it to our now famous quote, which is right behind me here. Do you think you have a purpose? If so, what? I think that mine is to make people happy. Does that make you happy? Yes. Purpose fulfilled. She changed her Instagram bio to that, 48 to 72 hours before she died. I choose to find significance in that. If there is universal energy that is infinite, and that energy has an idea, has an intellect of its own, which scientists say that it does, then I believe there was something in Molly's energy that knew her time inside a human body was coming to an end. Because that mantra there has sometimes kept me going, because I know that she would want me to be happy. She also would want me to feel what I need to feel. She wouldn't want people to tell me how to feel. My last day was now that I've read a book called Power, and it's just narcissistic tendencies in people. And I look now at some of the conversations and behaviors of Roy toward me in the last days of our vacation, the last 24 hours. And, I was missing Gracie and Molly. We were eating dinner at this really cool restaurant. It was in this building, this really cool building that was sort of sideways. And it was, so old. There were Rembrandt sketches, originals on the wall. We actually went to a museum and saw a lot of his initial original sketches and paintings. And we're sitting, and I was quiet because I just really missed Gracie and Molly. We're coming up on, day 8, going into, finishing day 7. And he immediately thought I was thinking of Doug and going back to work and everything else. And that I was bored with him. And I'm just looking at him like, I'm sitting here with you in Amsterdam. We've had this amazing week. I just miss my kids. And that was a non-negotiable conversation. I had to stop talking and just be silent, or it would have been a big fight. We ended up having a wonderful last night, but when I woke up in the morning, I was absolutely full of anxiety. I just wanted to get home. And I had that rumbling anxiety since the Anne Frank Museum visit, which had been midweek. So I remember we took a train and we were like alone on the train to the airport. And I thought that was so weird. And there's a picture of me, I'm peering over a train seat. Roy took it. And there's a picture of me sitting in I've had these on social media. I'm sitting in an airplane engine that's in an airport. And I'm laughing a big smile. And before Roy disappeared me from his social media and everything else. He had posted that on his Facebook saying, here's Barb just hours before her life fell apart. And I look at that picture and I remember his quote because it was, I was so happy to be coming home. I had the same red shirt on that I wore going there. I have to say, traveling with Roy was a lot of fun. I can't make that vacation ugly because it wasn't. Parts of it were amazing. And he was better about me wanting to come home at this point. We had a good flight home and I just was counting the hours until I would see Gracie and Molly. And then my last day, when I think of my last day with Molly, mine was May 1st, which is tomorrow if you're listening to this. And that was finding out that Roy had silenced my phone, that I had missed 4 hours of frantic text messages from Gracie and Kenny. I was a disaster. Me waiting in his car, rushing around, wanting to get home, and him taking a shower and just berating me for being so upset and overreacting. And then I remember we got home and my mother just scowled at Roy, which irritated me because, who is she to judge my life? And then spending the entire day in the ER and them just watching Molly sleep. And, there were parts of that day that I wasn't at all worried because it wasn't in my head that she would die. But there were parts of that day where I was like, what if she never wakes up? Like, what if this is it? And it would take away my breath. And I would say, please, she's not waking up. And I just was berated so many times by the hospital staff that I stayed quiet. And I was berated a lot by Roy. And I learned with him, as I just said, stay quiet. Arguing with people that don't really want to argue, what they want is to just pigeonhole you into a place. An argument is going to go on forever and ever. I see that a lot in political arguments and political agendas and social agendas. People on either side don't really want meaningful conversation. They just want to tell the other side they're wrong and name call. And that's what a life with a person with narcissistic tendencies is. I learned that I would be called the horrible names by Roy. They would hurt my feelings. If I brought them up, he would tell me I overreacted. If I insisted he apologize, he would give me a very, very insincere, fine, I'm sorry, sort of apology. And so you learn to simply be quiet and change the subject. And so that's what I did. So my last day was spent looking at Molly, watching her deteriorate and going back and forth between thinking, okay, we're in a hospital, we're safe, and why is nobody taking care of Molly? I'm incredibly glad that Kenny and Gracie had the last day with Molly that they had. I know for Julie and Nathan and their son, Caleb, happy birthday, Caleb, you're now 21, that their last days, they had a million potential last days because Caleb was sick for a long time. And I do know that his last hours alive, he was napping with his dad, his mom and family they were at the lake and they were, living their lives, and that Caleb was napping and that he said, it's okay, Daddy, I want to fall asleep. And then he fell asleep and then went with Jesus. So, our experiences are different. I watched Molly die and I didn't know she was dying at the time, but I knew something was drastically wrong. Watching her face change color and watching her body become so impossibly still that I get goosebumps now. So April 30th, 2016 was 8 years ago, 8 years. We only have 5 more of these before we have as many last days as we've had no more last days. And I've talked a lot about time. And as I record this podcast, a number of things have happened in this month of April, 2024, that have me ponder time a lot. Art Ellison died, and that was a death that was heart-wrenching to me. He was the father of a girl that I coached early in my coaching career. And so time stands still for a moment, and you're taken back to memories, and you hear people's stories about the things they loved about people. And Art's memorial service was full of wonderful stories. And so that was like a time. It's almost like a time fuck, excuse my French, but that's what it's like. And then Mrs. Russo had died. So her funeral was a traditional Catholic mass funeral, but the eulogy and the words of her best friend and her son were beautiful and brought me back to a million memories of my childhood and stories that I'd forgotten. The reception for that funeral was the best part because I got to be with Joey Russo and Rusty Barnes, 2 incredibly important people in my childhood who I haven't seen in the flesh, period, let alone together since the 80s, since we all left Concord 40 plus years ago. So all of those things make time stand still for a minute or take you back. I ate dinner at that reception with Rusty, but also with Lenny, his little sister, and Jean, their mother. And they were our neighbors. And I have so many memories with JR, the oldest, and all the memories and the social issues and all that was going on One of my favorite memories with Joey, I have two of them. I mean, with Joey and Rusty, but primarily with Rusty. Rusty was my next door neighbor. So Rusty and Joey are both gay. And so being gay in the 70s and early 80s is not as acceptable as it is now. They were never together as a couple, but they were best friends. And they were the epitome of all the stereotypes you might put around gay people that you would see in humor on TV, or, just the funny stereotypes that some of them are really not appropriate, but even funny from their standpoint. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but let me just explain. Rusty and Joey used to love to put on variety shows in the basement of the Barnes house or in the driveway. They were obsessed with Connie Francis. They were obsessed with fashion and how they looked. They were obsessed with hair. They were just very, very, very almost metrosexual in some regards. A lot of heterosexual men are obsessed with these things as well. But they were and they were totally supportive of all my teenage girl issues. So I remember I was like the last person in my grade to start my period. I was in 9th grade. I was 14 and a half, and I got it in December of my freshman year of high school. And so we were going to midnight service, Rusty and I whisper in his ear, Rusty, I got my period. So one of the things we talked about all these years later was the fact that I started my period and he was the first person I told. So funny. And then, of course, I had to fill in Joey with all the details of what it was like, and was it terrible, and how did I feel? And, that's a pretty significant memory. And then the other one is, so Rusty is Episcopalian, and I was as well. I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and Joey's Catholic, and he remains a practicing Catholic. And so Rusty and Joey are still very, very committed to church. But I would teach Rusty all about the Baha'i faith. And there's a part of the liturgy that says, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. And I would always whisper to Rusty, and I know when and where, because the Baha'i faith teaches progressive revelation, that each prophet from God is the fulfillment of the prior prophet, the one ahead of time. So Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, would fulfill the prophecy that Christ would return. And so we would say it, we'd whisper it to each other when we were sitting in our choir robes, or as we got older in the congregation. And so when I went up to hug Rusty at the church, the first thing he said to me is, this might be sacrilege, but you know what I do every Sunday, my whole life? And of course, I remembered right away exactly what he meant. These experiences are so different for me now, having lost a child, because it's a significant loss, right? It's a significant out of place, out of time loss. Rusty will be devastated when his parents pass. Joey is devastated by the loss of his mother, but it's the loss of his mother. So it follows the natural order of things. Children are meant to bury their parents, not when they're 5 and their parents are in their 30s, but the natural order indicates that in your 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, things happen and parents pass away, and the children move into the oldest living generation. And so the trauma and the sadness is the same, and the unhappiness and the grief, but the circumstances are different. But all of us at that reception just talked about how all the emotions attached to those memories come rushing back. I saw neighborhood friends. Jane was there. Deb was there. But I just have so many memories of my neighborhood growing up in Whites Park. And, your friends were who you lived near. You could walk everywhere together, and you did. And if you had no play date planned, you went to the park and there were always people playing there. That part of Concord no longer exists, and it's heart-wrenching for me. I feel that it's a loss, and I'm a bit sad by it sometimes. Neighborhood schools were the same way. Hardly any kids were bused. You walked to school because there was a functioning school close enough for you to walk to. And with all of our, Chris Rath pushed consolidations, which are showing the negative benefits now, we lost that as well. More kids are driven to school all the time now because nobody lives close enough to walk. Anyway, I digress. So April 30th, 2024, what does that have me doing now? Well, it has me marching through the season of Molly. I went to Bye Bye Birdie, which was the play that Molly had performed in April of 2016. Kenny, Gracie, Jack, and I watched opening night. I couldn't bring myself to stay and watch the other 2 nights. It's too much. The beauty of Karen Braz, the director, is that she is very, very talented at pulling in the talents of her actors and allowing them to use their personality traits to flesh out their characters. So Molly, as Gloria Rasputin, was totally different than Sweet Lucy Barnwell, who played Gloria Rasputin this time. Completely different experiences and performances of that role. That made it a bit easier for me to stomach, just because it wasn't like a repeat of Molly. It was the same play, the same songs, all of it was the same. But when it was over, Kenny said, that's completely different than I remember. Well, it was completely different because it was a completely different set of young people. But that was a huge piece. They donated half of their concession sales to the Molly B Foundation, which got them sponsorship for the upcoming Molly B Turns 21 Gala. That was heartwarming for me. I was able to get through it. And they dedicated all 3 performances to our family. And they had this poster of Molly as Gloria. It was heart-wrenching and beautiful and difficult. I have to admit, I had alcohol every night that weekend. I just get to a point. It's not that I want to be drunk. I just need to numb it up a little bit. So now what do I have to look forward to? Well, tomorrow is May 1st. And so now we get into May. So April, truly April, from April 1st to April 30th was the last month that Molly was alive. You know, when she did her final show of Bye Bye Birdie on Saturday the 16th that year, she had 2 Saturdays left, one of which would be the last day of her life, ultimately. I look at that and my heart goes in my throat because I want to run back and fix it and correct all the mistakes. I still have that utter abject panic that I have to go back and fix it. Please God, please God, please God, let me fix it. And I can't. It is unfixable in the way that I wish it to be fixed. So tomorrow is May 1st. So May 1st is the opening day of Death Week. Death Week is the week, May 1st to May 7th, that Molly was in the ER and then on life support and then unplugged and brought home in a casket. So this is a very different reality now. April, we're remembering Molly alive. And May, what we're remembering is the process of taking Molly from an alive human being and putting her in a box and burying her in the ground and celebrating her life. And so we will do that. So April 30th is Tuesday. Today is a Tuesday. So this Saturday, May 4th, Ambuscade CrossFit in Concord and Bedford is hosting the Molly WOD. WOD, W-O-D, stands for Workout of the Day. And it's a workout that Emily McCormick, a member of CrossFit Ironborn when Molly died, created in Molly's honor. Emily was a dancer, and Molly and Gracie loved her. They talked ballet all the time. And what Emily always noticed about Molly was her affinity for making sure everyone could participate. And so the workout is a very doable workout. I won't go through it now. I've talked about it before. And so that's this Saturday. If you do CrossFit, consider doing the Molly WOD on Saturday. It's like the longest it would take you is maybe 12, 13 minutes. Maybe 15 minutes. It would be a great warm up to do at a reasonable pace. Put a pink shirt on, take a picture and send it to me. You can email it or deliver it to any of my social media. There's an event page on Facebook for this workout, which is a public event. You could find it and post a picture on the event. I would love it. We're using it as a fundraiser, but primarily for local gyms. If a gym raises $300, then they'll get a sponsorship, a table sponsorship at the event, which is May 18th. At the Capitol Center for the Arts here in Concord, and 10 tickets for gym members to come and really see what Molly was all about. If your gym wants to participate in fundraising for the Molly B Foundation, that would be amazing. A $300 sponsorship would get your gym advertised at the event. So that's coming up this Saturday. And then the following Monday is Molly B Monday, which is just a day of good deeds. And that's not necessarily a fundraiser. That's more of like do something good in honor of Molly. And then May 18th, of course, is her 21st birthday celebration. And that's going to be amazing. I've been frantically ordering balloons and food and everything for that. And then that really brings us through May and the events that focus on her life and her death. As always, proceeds from my book all go to the Molly B Foundation. My hopes and dreams around that book are that it becomes a bestseller so that the Molly B Foundation can be really a self-supporting. I mean, of course, you fundraise. That's what foundations do. And you encourage people to give because that connects them to your cause. But I would love for the book to make it. So I hate to sell things, but promoting Molly doesn't feel like selling to me. My book is available on Audible now, or you can buy it. You can order one from me and I'll autograph it and send it. If you order it from Gibson's bookstore here in Concord and let them know you want me to sign it, I'm happy to go down and sign it. And that supports a local bookstore. And the other thing, if you've already read it, and I've gotten several $100s in royalties already. So I know lots and lots of people have read it. And I've sold on my own, which doesn't even count to the royalties, about 60 copies. So if you would consider leaving a review, either on Goodreads or Barnes & Noble or Amazon, the more reviews, the higher up in the algorithm the book will get, and it will come up in people's searches. So that's a free way. If you've already purchased the book, is to leave a review. It doesn't even have to be long. It just could simply say, I read it and you should read it too. So those are the things that are coming up. Me personally, by the time I record this, I will have finished the quarterfinal workouts for the CrossFit Open, which I qualified for. That was a huge boost for me. 670 women qualified. I was 599th. So I'd get a bottom 12 pair of shorts if I was comparing this to my cross-country coaching days. The final connection to time standing still is the Boston Marathon. So this year it was on, April 15th. I went down with Jack to visit Linda and Alyssa, two of my track team mates from my BU days. And Alyssa had her grandson, Jet. And so Linda and I share IVF journeys. She had her twins through IVF. And so it was emotional. I didn't get to see Joni, which bums me out. I would have loved to show Jack to Joni and Joni to Jack. But again, it was one of those things where we had lunch at the Union Building at BU. Here's a quick little story that I love about that visit. I'm in the car with Gracie and Jack. We have no significant plans on where we're going to meet, only that Alyssa was dropping off people at Fenway Park and Linda was taking the train into town. And how would we meet? So I was in my car and we got, I'm driving. So we get to Kenmore Square and I'm like, Gracie, I don't really know where we're going. Let's just drive up through BU. I'll show you all the buildings where I lived and all this. And so I did that. So I pulled off to the side and I texted them and said, so I'm on Comm Ave. I'm sort of showing Gracie BU. Where are you guys? And no lie, within 12 seconds, my return text from them was, we just parked on the BU bridge. We're walking to where Veggie Dining Hall was. Well, Veggie Dining Hall was located in the George Sherman Union, which is the Union Building, which is now a series of restaurants that you can go in and order food and sit and eat. So I was right there. I was at that intersection when I was sending this text. So we parked, we met, we had lunch, and then we walked down to the Marathon Expo. And then Linda and Alyssa and Jet went off to a dinner with relatives, and Gracie and I walked back to the car and drove home. So, but again, it was an entire day of memories and time standing still. And I think the biggest thing I remember is it's easy for me to filter everything through Molly because I grew her. And she is a neurologically in my body, genetic piece of my physical, emotional, mental, social makeup. She's a part of me forever. But I had so much life before there was even a Molly in existence. And growing up with Joey and Rusty and Lanny and White's Park and going to BU and being the first female NCAA All-American because Title IX was enacted my freshman year. So yay, finally girls could participate in college sports and get scholarships. That was a huge piece of my life. My whole college experience with Donna, Linda, and all my teammates, Alyssa and Marty and just everybody. April was a pretty significant month for me, brain surgery in April. So many memories came up. And so here I am now, recording on April 16th, publishing on April 30th, heading into May, to the month of Molly, as we continue the season of Molly, trying to make sense of and rally around the positive things that Molly brought, being okay with remembering them in a way that doesn't always decimate me and bring me to my knees. So that's that. That's my memory, last day. I'm hoping someday to be a guest on that last day podcast. I'd suggest you take a listen. They're not easy episodes to listen to, but as always, they're heart-wrenching and heartwarming at the same time. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, support podcasts that were meaningful. So here we are heading into May. Next week, I talked to Austin, a girl I coached who's living nomadically. And Kenny and I are actually in the process of applying to spend 12 months in Italy with Jack, participating in Boundless Life. So take a listen next week. It's something completely out of my normal realm and just shows how wonderful it is to take risks and leaps in life to make sure you're living authentically. So anyway, as always, be good to yourself. Once you're good to yourself, be good to someone else. And in the words of Bill Hobbrick, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.